In this week's episode, I'm going to teach you probably the most valuable lesson that I could ever teach you. I'm going to share with you a story of how one man saved his marriage by himself. First, he almost ruined it, and then by changing his own behavior and his own perspective and his own mindset, he literally saved his marriage. It's an insanely inspiring story, and I'm really excited to share it with you. What up, Garrett? Welcome to the show.
How you doing, my man?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm surviving today.
You're a little sicky poo today.
Yeah, you wake up some mornings and you feel like you got it all together, and some mornings you're crawling out of bed, hanging on for dear life.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, thanks for carving time to be with me today, even though you're not feeling so hot.
I appreciate you having me.
So my podcast is all about marriage and relationships. And I know you have a really, really interesting story to tell. And I would love if you would share a little bit of your story with me, and maybe just kick it off with telling me kind of how you met your wife and fell in love. And then we'll just kind of pick it up from there.
Sounds good. I was one of those lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, guys who met his wife in high school. She was the cheerleader. I was the football player, although that was not how we met. In a perfect world, that would be it. No, we met in a government civics class. And really, I really liked her, but at the time I had not a lot of experience when it comes to flirting and or dating with women. So I just kind of tried to figure it out, and it was not the best approach. When you talk to my wife and ask her, she will roll her eyes and laugh. So I
think that's true of most high school guys.
Right. There's no smooth like, how you doing?
No.
No, it was bad. So really, my approach was to bother her so much so that eventually she would pay attention to me. And we were headed to Phoenix for this a government competition, and we're all on the bus, and I'm like, what am I going to do? We stopped at this little podunk town for breakfast at a Carl's Jr., and she's sitting there about to bite into her sandwich, and I come from behind and smack it out of her hand. And she turns around and looks at me like, who are you?
Garrett?
Man.
No, bro.
Look at me. Look, right? But in my mind, I was like, hey, smooth move, man. You got her attention. So I'm thinking things are going well. She's like, stay the hell away from me. So we end up going to this competition, and we end up winning, which gets us a trip to DC, and we're super excited. And of course, the first person I want to hug when it's all said and done is her, and she's running the other way. I mean, and our relationship kind of started that way. I would try and make it to her class before the bell rang because I wanted to walk her to the next class, and she would purposely leave class before the bell rang so that I wouldn't be able to do that. And we played this cat and mouse game for a while before, in her words, she said she finally consented to the fact that, maybe I wasn't that bad of a guy. But that's kind of how we met. And this year will actually be our 20-year anniversary. We've been together 24 years, but this will be 20 years of marriage.
That is awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you met by being a terrible flirt. How did you guys actually fall in love?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think like most couples, there's something there when you start. You don't know exactly what it is. You don't really understand what it is, but you want to explore what that looks like. And it really came by, and I've talked about this before in other formats, but it really came because I wanted to see what I could do for her, right? What could I do to make her life better? What could I do to impress her? What could I do to make her feel loved? So
besides smacking sandwiches out of her hand.
That was the one and only time. Trust me, I've never done that one again.
I'm really glad.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like, what could I do for her? Could I take her someplace nice? Could I buy her a flower? Could I write her a note? Could I, cook her dinner, whatever it was. And that's kind of how our relationship was set up at the beginning was, what can I do to make her life better, her feel that, I actually cared about her.
That's awesome. So you've been married for 24 years now, almost, you said?
We've been together 24. It'll be 20 years this summer.
That's like a big anniversary. That's a long time to spend together.
Yes.
My guess is that over 2 decades married, you've probably seen your fair share of ups and downs. Do you want to share some of those ups and some of those downs with us?
Absolutely. I'll start with the ups, right? Because that's what everybody wants to talk about. But don't worry, I have plenty of downs as well. I think if I look back at our 20 years of marriage, the ups always included family. As much as I'd like to say something about my work and what I accomplished there, or I got into marathon running for a while, so what I accomplished there, it seems like everything up in marriage had to do something with family. It was a trip that we took. It was the birth of our children. It was some accomplishment that they had, and so there. If I was to say like any one thing, I really couldn't, but really what we've tried to do in our marriage, whether we were doing well at the time or not, was try and focus on spending time together. The one thing that everybody wants more of that we ultimately can't control is time, was that one thing, right? And when things were going well in our relationship, it's because time was present, and I was investing time. When things weren't, it was the complete opposite. So the good times always centered around that, and the bad times, again, the lack of. And if we're talking about bad times, a lot of people, men especially, when they get into relationships, much like when I was saying that we started together, we were really focused, or men are really focused on trying to do what they can for their prospective spouse, right? Taking her out on dates and opening up the door for her and buying her flowers and giving her notes and all of these things that seem silly and seem simple, but ultimately is what creates that strong bond and creates that relationship. Well, you get married, and what do most men stop doing? The very things that got him married in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And I was the perfect example of that. I thought that once we got married, okay, I can now sit on the couch and watch ESPN, or I can go out with my friends, or I can start doing all these other things because I'm already married. She's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
These were the thoughts that were going through my head. And then, of course, you start your career, and what happens at the beginning of your career? Well, most careers, whether you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, or you work for somebody else, most careers demand that you work extra time. They demand that you work the hours when people aren't working. They demand sacrifices on your part. And I was no different. I was actually a police officer for 15 years. And when I started, I worked nights and weekends. So I was away from the family for all of the holidays. I was away from the family for most of the birthday party celebrations. I was away from the family for, church and any church-related functions. I was just so focused on work. Now, at the beginning, it wasn't voluntary, right? It was mandatory. But eventually it turned to being voluntary. I didn't have to work nights. I didn't have to work weekends, but I chose to. See, because as men, we think that by getting paid and making money, that ultimately is going to increase the love in our relationship. It's going to increase the intimacy. It's going to increase the connection.
Right.
The problem is that it doesn't, right? It's the opposite. It's time. It's the things that you can't buy.
I feel like, just to jump in here, I feel like part of the reason there is because, like, initially when you start working, you want to provide for your family, and you want to feel a sense of accomplishment. You want to feel like you're a good husband, a good father, a good provider. And then what happens is, from what I've seen, like, the more time you spend away from your family, the more, when you are with your family, you feel like a failure. And then the only place you really get your wins is from work. And so it goes from starting out from a good intention to turning into an escape. Like, you run away from where you feel like a failure, and you spend a lot of your time and your energy working on stuff, working at work where you feel like it might be the only place you're getting a win, or you feel competent, or you feel like you're respected, or you're good at what you do.
100%, that's it, right? And because we as men, we have two basic needs. We want to get paid and we want to get laid. I mean, that's really what it is. Women have different needs. They want safety and they want security. In other words, they want a roof over their head and they want a man by their side, right? And so if they get what they want, we will always get what we want. Men, listen, you give a woman what she wants, you will always get what you want, right? But again, we forget this. And so much like you said, is I started chasing money. I started chasing these things that I thought ultimately would make my wife happy. But the one thing that she wanted, which was me by her side, was non-existent. And so I'd show up after working 60, 70 hours, and I'd show up and I'd be like, hey, and she'd be like, hey, there's the trash, there's a dirty diaper, oh, and the dishes need to be done. And I'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm the man. I just worked 70 hours this week. Like, I want to get some love in, right? And so it started to create this tension at first, but ultimately created this distance between us. And I would start to tell myself stories that, oh, my wife doesn't love me because, in work, well, the boys love me because, right? And so you start to create these stories, these imagined stories in your head, and they start to become your reality. So much like you said, I started to prefer to spend time at work because there I knew that I was loved and appreciated. I knew that the guys were like, "Oh man, you're so awesome," right? High five and hey, let's go out and hang out and all that kind of stuff. And so I started to spend less and less of my voluntary time with my family, which ultimately led to more problems, right? I'd show up and my kids, I just wanted to come running, Daddy, we love you. And I'd walk over and they would either be playing on their phones or watching TV or doing something else and just not paying attention to me. And I'm like, what the hell? My wife wouldn't come and greet me at the door. Like there wasn't anything there. Now, of course, what's the first thing that every man wants to do in that situation? Well, it's to blame the other person for the failures, for the things that were happening, And so I started to blame my wife, like, it's your fault that we don't have a loving, passionate relationship. I blame the kids, like, you guys don't know what you're doing. And I'd start yelling and screaming at them and then go back and find another way to sedate, right? And in my particular case, it led me down this path of drinking. I started drinking with the boys. Why? Because that's what the boys are doing and the boys like me and I want to be like the boys. And then that didn't solve any problems. So I'm falling further and further away from my family, working more and more, and I start to get anxiety. Anxiety because, again, things aren't working the way I want them to, and I don't know how to deal with them. So I get prescribed some medication, and I did what every person would do in that situation: abuse the medication. So here I am drinking, now abusing prescription medication, and still not in a place where I feel like I'm happy. I still feel that anxiety, that chaos, that overwhelm every single day.
Yeah. Take me into like a specific situation where you're dealing with that anxiety and you're drinking, you're using the medications or you're misusing the medications. Like take me into a moment that kind of would paint a picture of what that's like.
That's a good question.
It's so easy to gloss over,
It is. And I want you, if you're listening right now, it may not be prescription medication. It may be porn. It may be ESPN. Hell, it may be you spending, every waking hour at the gym. Just the important thing is that you're trying to find a way to cope with what's not working. And for me, in those moments, it was, I would feel good when I got to work, right? And my shift was a 10-hour shift. And I'd feel good when I got to work. And then I'd start to get halfway through the shift and I'd start thinking about, oh, I got to go home in a few hours. And I'd get towards the end of the shift. And then my anxiety was just like, I was almost shaking at times. And I would purposely go out and try and find some other case, find a DUI or find a drug case or find something else that would prevent me from going home. I'd be like, oh man, I got to stay late. Sorry. I got another 3 hours of work because I didn't want to go home, and so I'd take the medication and then,
what would happen when you went home that was so bad?
So we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, like all the things that I was doing to invest in the relationship. And so I knew that there was something there, right? There was a connection, there was a bond. I'd get home and it was almost like a cold, empty feeling. I'd walk in and it was like I was a guest in my own house. I'd look at my wife and try and put on the moves, if you will, but really she felt like nothing more than a roommate with a ring. Sure, we'd sleep in the same bed, but on the other sides of the bed, we wouldn't really talk about much other than what the kids had going on and what my excuse was for not making it. And it just became this really cold, dark place. And so I wanted to spend less and less time there. Again, not understanding that I was the reason why the house felt that way. I was the reason why our relationship was on the rocks. And so I kept going down this path to where, I'd spend less and less time at work, more and more time doing other things. And ultimately, what does a man want? A man just wants to be loved. Deep down inside, a man just wants to be loved. He wants to be appreciated. And for me, that turned into, let me go find a woman who appreciates me. Find somebody else who's willing to give me what I want. Which ended up happening, right? Of course, you will always find what you're looking for, whatever it is. And I found a woman and, it started simply as texting and then turned into talking and then turned into spending more time together. And ultimately it led to an affair. And at this lowest of lows, here I am already drinking multiple times a week, abusing prescription drugs. Now I'm cheating on my wife and I've tried option 1, didn't work. Well, let me add option 1 to option 2. No, that didn't work. Let me add option 3. And it's like everything that I was trying wasn't working.
Yeah. What do you tell yourself leading up to that? Like, Did you ever recognize that things were kind of getting to a bad place? Like, was there any point in that journey trying to find all these different, test out all these different solutions to kind of find peace or numb the pain? Was there ever a point where you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing?
Not yet. Not yet. Because at that point, I was still justifying everything that I was doing. I was like, my needs are most important. And if my needs aren't being met, I'm going to go find a way to meet my needs. Right.
Yeah. What were some of the other like justifications that you used?
So you start to look around and you see the people around you. Right. And again, you'll always find what you're looking for. So I would look around and I would see, oh, well, they got divorced. Oh, well, he seems happier. He's by himself. Oh, well, this and that. And I'd look around and I'd see, oh, people who are drinking, oh, they're happy. I mean, come on, turn on the TV. And what do you see? Every beer commercial, everybody's laughing and dancing and having a good time. So you're like, oh, well, yeah, if I drink, that'll make me happy and I'll have a good time. And then, you look at all the movies that are centered around what? They're all centered around men cheating on their wives, right? And the woman's always this sexy, seductive thing. And you're like, oh yeah, man, that's so awesome. Like, I want that. And you don't pay attention to the backstory of everything that it's destroying, right? So I was simply just looking for what I thought was the solution to my problem. And as soon as I found something that matched up, I would say, okay, well, this is the answer. I'm going to go there.
Yeah. Got it. So you're chasing this stuff and then you end up having an affair. Then what happens?
Well, I remember, and this wasn't like one time, it was multiple times, but I remember thinking, I don't feel love. I don't feel connection. I don't feel anything. It's literally
with this other woman.
There's nothing there, right? I thought it was going to be there, but it wasn't. And I remember being at this point of like, well, what am I doing? And none of it's working. So what's the next best option? Well, again, looking around, I'm like, oh, well, the next best option is divorce. Like, she's obviously still the source of my problem. So let me just, I'm done with it. I'll just move on. And so I told her, I was like, I'm done. I'm moving out. And I remember just grabbing a little suitcase and walking out the door. My kids are screaming and crying. She's pulling on my shirt, trying to get me to stay. And I'm just like numb. There was no feeling. You've heard of people having that 1,000-yard stare. Like, that's what I had. I was just without feeling. You could have punched me in the face. I wouldn't have felt anything.
Just numb. Just
completely numb to life. And I spent the next 8 months or so living on my friend's couch, which again, because I didn't care. And I'm working 16 to 20 hours a week, just trying to make it all work, right? And thinking again in my mind, well, if I just make more money, of course, it doesn't solve anything. So I plunged deeper and deeper into this depression and deeper into this feeling trapped in my own life. And I remember the lowest point is I was about 3:00 in the morning. I just got done working a long shift. I was going to have to be back at work at 6. I'm like, there's no point going home. So I'm just reclining my driver's seat back in the parking garage. And I'm looking up at the ceiling, just thinking, how the hell did I get here? And I remember glancing over to my passenger seat. In my passenger seat, I had my duty belt. And on my duty belt, I had my gun. And for the first time in my life, I thought about it. I was like, maybe if I just kill myself now, then I won't be a problem for anybody anymore.
Ugh.
My wife and the kids will have the money, like, and for everybody.
The wife and the kids, where they're just begging you not to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And here
they really want you to stay, but
yeah. And here I am
they'd be better
thinking in that point, because I was so low that I would be better off if I wasn't around.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm just like seriously contemplating what this would look like. I remember there's a voice that came into me, and it was a voice that just spoke very simple words. And it asked one question. It said, what do you want? And up until that point, I knew what I wanted, but I'd buried it so deep, I'd forgotten about it. Because what I really wanted was a loving, passionate, and intimate relationship. What I really wanted was a connection with my kids who love me. What I really wanted was also to be successful at work, right? Finding what we call the proverbial work-life balance. I wanted it all, right? But I didn't have it. And then the next question, what are you waiting for? And that one was like a punch to the gut. Because at that moment, I realized how much I'd been lying to myself, how much I'd been justifying my actions, how much I'd been blaming everyone else for everything that was happening in my life. And I made that decision. Like, that was the turning point in my life, which was quit blaming everyone for what's not happening in your life, for what's not working, for the lack of results. And it's time to just assume responsibility. And that night I went back to the house and I told my wife, I was like, hey, I want to talk to you. We went for this long walk, a few hours, and I just like poured it all out. And she cried and I cried, and bless my wife's soul for being willing to give me a second chance, if you will, to put up with me. But that was the turning point of everything, was finally taking responsibility and saying, it's not God's fault. It's not my wife's fault. It's not my kid's fault. It's not society's fault. It's literally my fault. I got here because of me.
Choices you made.
Exactly. But it was very empowering, because at that point I understood that I also had the power to turn everything around.
Yeah. I want to talk about the turnaround, but first I want to talk about something you said at the very beginning of the podcast. So one of the first things you said is men want to get laid and they want to get paid. But you spent so much time losing yourself in your work, and you had an affair and you got laid. And why wasn't that enough? If that's what men want.
Right. That's the surface level of things, right? If you think of at surface level, what will keep everything together? It's women for safety and security, and men, it's paid and laid. Like that's what we want, right? But underneath it is this thing called purpose, right? Underneath it is this thing called, what is this whole life really about? And if you're not connected to that purpose, then you can get paid as much as you want. You can get laid wherever you want, but it's not going to give you that sense of connection, that sense of purpose. And that's where, again, family becomes so important. If you understand the greater purpose of life, then you start to see the pieces that need to be in place in order to get those results that you really want.
I'm glad that you talked about that, because I think I think your story is more than just that simplification of like the surface level needs. I think that there's, just in your story alone, you're already showing that there's so much more beyond what we think we want sometimes. And if the stuff underneath isn't there, then the surface level stuff doesn't matter. So that purpose is important. So you go on this walk, you have a conversation with your wife, you both cry, you decide it's time for me to start taking responsibility for my choices. Was it like a light switch flipping and all of a sudden life got better, or what did that look like?
No. And I can't even make the no bigger, but like it's the biggest no. No way. And probably for the next 2 years, I'm talking years, 2 years, it was nothing more than one day would be good and 2 days would be bad. One day would be good and 2 days would be bad. Just this constant struggle, still feeling like I'm in quicksand. Like I can see the light, but I'm not getting any closer to it, right? And it was this constant struggle of like, I know what I want. I want this connection. I want intimacy. I want love. I want all these things. But why is it that I'm not able to get that? And this constant back and forth, and you get tired after a while.
Yeah. What did a good day look like, and what did a bad day look like?
So a good day looked like, hey, I got laid and my kids loved me. Basically that's what it was, right? I'd come home and we'd play a game, or we'd go play in the pool, or we'd do something together, and then of course, I'd get some loving, which.
What does that mean for you? Like, because I know there's going to be people who are listening who might bristle at like how casually you talk about that, about the desire to get laid. So like, I think it's important, because I think there's a lot of guys who really value that. But the question, I think it's important to address why that's important. Like, why did getting sex from your wife help you have a good day, or why did that mean something to you?
That's now you're opening up a box, but that's a good box to open.
Yeah.
A lot of men don't understand what intimacy really means. They don't understand what connection really means, right? And then, do we want sex? And I know I kind of glossed over this at the beginning, but do we want sex? Yes. By nature, we want sex, right? We're pre-programmed to want to reproduce. But there's something, like I was saying before, it's deeper, right? It's that connection that we're actually searching for. And that connection, if you play your cards right, happens within the relationship, within a marriage. Women are much more in tune to this, which is why if you're an a-hole, odds are you're not getting laid. And when you're nice, odds are you are, right? We can kind of play that game, because they are much more in tune. They know that sex is part of the connection. What I didn't really understand at that point was that connection happened through sex, right? So for me, I was still like, sex, good, yay, no sex, bad, boo, very simplistic, right? But that's what I'm saying is, at this point, I didn't really understand the difference between a good day and a bad day, other than sex was involved in some way, shape, or form, right?
Got it.
Really, it's more than sex, it's intimacy, right? So when I started to go down this path, and really what started to change things for me was the path of personal development. It was starting to understand that I didn't have all the answers inside of me. I needed to go find the answers. So I spent 2 years struggling, going back and forth, trying to figure it out. Nothing, literally nothing. I couldn't tell you when a good day was going to happen, and I couldn't tell you when a bad day was going to happen. I didn't know. So I started down this path of personal development. We went to programs together. We went to counselors. We went to the big names. We went to Tony Robbins and all of these other things. And we'd come away with some stuff, but not like the whole thing, right? And what I realized is like there had to be something out there that when I looked at somebody and I said, man, they seem to have it all together. We all know the fake Instagram stories of the people that look like they have a good marriage and they look like they live in a nice house and really it's all fake. But we all know the real people where you're like, man, I want what they have. Like they just look at each other the right way, you know, and he's happy all the time and he's energetic. And oh, by the way, he's also successful at work. Like he's got it all, right? We want it all. And so it's like, how do you get that? You know, and I started to go down this path of personal development. And in my particular instance, you know, I paid literally well over $100,000 of my money, like going all in on figuring this thing out. And what I realized is there was a couple of things that needed to be in place for me to get what I wanted. And the first thing was some type of system that every single day allowed me to invest in what mattered most. Now, what do I mean by that? For me, I call it a morning routine, right? Whatever your morning routine is, your morning routine has to make sure that you're connecting with yourself. You have to make sure that you're connecting with God. You have to make sure that you're connecting with your family. And then ultimately that foundation is what gives you the clarity and the focus that you need to succeed inside a business. So that was the first thing that I needed. The second thing is I had to go back to the foundation, to the framework, to what worked when I was just getting started. No, not smacking burgers out of hands, but everything else around it, right? Which was my wife wanted to feel like she was appreciated. She wanted to be dated, in other words. Sure, we've been together 20 years, but does that mean that I don't send her texts that I love you? Does that mean that I don't go randomly buy her flowers? Or, hey, we're going on a surprise trip this weekend. I have to. I have to, because if I don't, then that connection is much harder to predict and it's much harder to maintain. Same thing with my kids. If I want to have a strong relationship with my kids, I got to spend time with them. Not doing what I want. Like, let's be honest, every single dad wants to take his son or his daughter to a sporting event and say, you're going to be an athlete when you grow up. But what if they just want to paint your nails or they just want to play soccer or, heaven forbid, even video games, right? So if you're willing to invest the time in the things that create the foundation and the clarity for you, then ultimately that allows you to push forward in the things in life that you want to spend the rest of your time in, which is your business.
That's awesome. So when you started focusing on kind of getting through this personal development kick and started focusing on the framework and the system, and tell me like what started to change. You went from having like one good day, 2 bad days, one good day, 2 bad days. And then you start learning this stuff and start kind of getting a little bit more focus and clarity. Then what happens?
It was a process, right? But I started to see more consistent results. And what happened was I was able to spend time in the morning taking care of me, you know, taking care of my connection with God, taking care of my body physically. And then I was able to spend just a little bit of time, a little note or a video to the wife, a little note or video to the kids, right? And then ultimately it gave me the space so that when I was at work, I wasn't thinking about what wasn't working at home. I wasn't thinking about, man, I need to do something for my wife. I wasn't thinking about, man, I just yelled at my kid. I'd taken care of all the things that had to be taken care of in that front. So it allowed me to focus at work, right? Which then when I was focused at work, I got stuff done. Weird. And then I'd go home and I wouldn't be thinking about work because I actually got stuff done. So I could focus on spending time with the kids and going to the park and taking my wife out and things like that. So the main thing that thing did was it allowed me to focus and with much more predictability, say, I know the formula to create good days. I know the formula to create connection with my wife and my kids. I know the formula to make myself wake up in the morning and not feel stressed out and overwhelmed and not even want to get out of bed.
That's awesome. It reminds, what I hear you saying a lot here is, this is just like a little message I'm picking out, is that humans operate on momentum in a lot of ways. And if you can start off your day by getting some wins it can give you positive momentum throughout your day to continue getting wins and starting your day off on the right foot, like put you on a trajectory to accomplish your goals and create the life that you want. And a lot of us start our day either without any sense of intention. We just kind of let our day run us instead of us running our day. And then we're kind of at the mercy of our day. Or we oftentimes start off on the wrong foot and we start with negative momentum. And then that spirals in a downward cycle and can leave us at the end of the day going, oh my gosh, I do not want to do this again.
You're 100% right. 100% right. And I'll take this back. I know I haven't talked much about police work. I got a ton of stories, but
it's all right.
Another time.
Another stories, man. I love a good story.
But what made me successful as a police officer, here's one of the things that I also learned was that I had all the tools that I needed. I just didn't know how to apply them to my personal life. Like if you can close sales, it's like if you're a great salesman or you're a business owner or you're, a team leader or whatever, you know the skills that it takes to produce results at work. It's just how do you translate those to home, right? And so for me, it was very much in order to succeed at work. A lot of the situations that I was in, it was the life and death situations. I didn't talk about it, but I was on the SWAT team and I worked undercover and I did a lot of stuff that literally was life and death in some situations. And if I didn't plan ahead of time or put myself in a position of strategic advantage ahead of time, then the likelihood of me succeeding went way down. And it became almost 50-50, like whether this is going to work or not.
Yeah.
And there were times where that happened where I, fly by the seat of my pants and by the grace of God, I'm still here. And, there's a lot of stories that way, but what I'm saying is that's what made it work was I knew ahead of time, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Okay, what steps do I need to take ahead of time to almost guarantee that it was going to happen?
Right.
And when I started taking that into my personal life and saying, okay, I know ahead of time that I want a strong, intimate, and passionate relationship with my wife. Okay, what steps do I need to take ahead of time to make that happen? We talk about the love languages. I'm sure you've mentioned those before. You need to understand what your wife likes. I know I've mentioned flowers and notes and stuff like that. Some wives don't like that. And that's okay. You have to figure out ahead of time, what does my wife like and what can I do for her that in the end, again, is going to lead to that strong, passionate, and intimate relationship. So it's really about putting yourself in a position of strategic advantage, not once a week, not once a year, but like every single day.
Yeah, that's really smart. So tell me now in hindsight, like looking at where you're at right now, what is your relationship like now compared to when you were in that place where you were numbing yourself, where you were like running away from your problems, where you were trying to escape the pain that you were facing, that day that you're sitting in your cop car and you look at your belt and you look at the gun and you're like, maybe life would be better without me here. Obviously, you're in a different place now. Can you contrast where you were and where you are right now?
It's difficult for me to imagine that I was in that place. So difficult. And it wasn't so long ago, maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah.
It's difficult for me to imagine because my life is so different right now. I talk about my relationship with my wife. I mean, it is not perfect, right? Because there's no such thing as perfection. But like when we argue, when we scream at each other, instead of lasting weeks, which it has before, yes, weeks, it lasts a couple hours or it lasts 20 minutes or something like that, right? And we get over it quickly. Why? Because we've got that buildup of deposits. You think about a bank account.
Yeah.
Nobody likes going to the ATM, pushing the pin and then trying to get money out and it's like negative balance. You're like, damn it, not again, right? But that's what it is in your relationship is if you keep making deposits, sometimes you got to pull some cash out. And if you've got money in there, then okay, cool. Like, we're going to get through this moment, but I got to pull some cash out, but we're going to get through this. We're all right. Right. And so seeing at like my wife, for example, texting her earlier and just a simple note, hey, I love you. And I appreciate the fact that, you made dinner last night and you were able to make time to help the kids with their homework and just simple things like that. And her to respond back with a loving message to me. It's like, I was never doing that before. I was just assuming that because I was the man that she would love, honor, and respect me. And it doesn't work that way. So it's really hard to see the difference. All I'll tell you is from where I am now, I have the life that I wanted. I have the marriage that I wanted. I have the relationship with my kids. When my daughter, she's 17 now, her freshman year of high school, there was a boy that liked her, and she's like, I don't like you. And he literally told her to her face, well, I'm going to go kill myself. And she came home crying because for the first time in her life, she's confronted with this thing of
Oh yeah.
suicide. To be able to just sit with her on her bed and let her cry and then just talk about it again, because we built that relationship, that to me meant the world. That she'll talk to me about things like that instead of keeping them inside, instead of going to social media, instead of,
Yeah.
trying some other means. She knows that she
Or
has
burying it.
trust.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome, dude. And the thing that's like really standing out to me is your marriage has been a bit of a roller coaster. Like your life has been a roller coaster. You had some really high highs and you've had some really low lows, and you're back up to the high highs again. And like nobody is excluded from high highs and low lows. Some of those come just as a result of being human. A lot of the times they're things that we choose. But what's really fascinating to me is that it doesn't, and maybe I'm kind of overlooking your wife a little bit here, but it doesn't sound like a whole lot changed about your wife. It sounds like she was pretty much just like an awesome person who probably has normal human weaknesses throughout, but the quality of your marriage went to the crapper in a large part because of the choices you were making. And then your quality of your marriage also has become extraordinary because of the choices that you've been making. And it's not necessarily that your wife went out and found all the answers and did it with you. She didn't hold your hand through the whole thing. She obviously stood by you. But I think in large part, it sounds to me like you have transformed your marriage by simply changing what you choose and transforming yourself. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. My marriage changed because I changed myself. My life changed because I changed myself. My ability to make and keep money changed because I changed myself. Everything changed when I took personal responsibility. When I said, hey, I am where I am today, not because of, again, a God or society or because of a boss or because of my wife. Like, I am where I am today because of the decisions that I've made. And when you can do that, David Goggins talks about this. He talks about the accountability mirror, right? And it's a variation on that. But when you can say that my life is the way it is today because of the choices I've made, what it then allows you to do is put yourself in a position of power. Like, man, I can literally create whatever I want if I choose to take responsibility for it. And that's when everything shifted. And as I said before, it wasn't an overnight thing. And I know you mentioned the roller coaster up and down. It's really almost become for us just a gradual incline, right? A gradual upward movement, which when you think about what you want out of life, that's what you want. You want forward progress. You want momentum.
Momentum. Yep.
Exactly. And how do you get momentum? Well, that's right. It starts with you.
Yeah. And it starts with those little things done often. Like there wasn't one extraordinary moment, one grandiose gesture that saved your marriage. It sounds like it was years and years and years of little things, little like text messages built up over time, little opportunities of being there for your kids, and little moments of being there for your wife and listening to her and trying to understand probably how you've hurt her in the past and what you could do to make things right, and like chipping away at that giant barrier that you had built up for yourself, just piling rocks up between you and the connection with the people that you love. You got to now take all those rocks down, and it takes a while. But the fact that you're like consistently showing up and picking up a rock and pulling it off the pile, like over time, all of a sudden it opens up the lanes of connection. I love this. There's this really interesting analogy. I think I thought it up. I don't know. Maybe I heard it somewhere else, but I can't remember where I heard it, if I heard it somewhere else. But I like to think of like communication inside of a relationship, like a giant, like 5-lane freeway, and like there's all this traffic going one way and there's all this traffic going another way. And the traffic is the communication. And the goal is for the communication to get to its destination. But every so often an accident happens on the highway. Like it happens. And that's an argument, a disagreement, a yelling match, whatever happens. And what happens when that accident occurs is that it backs up all the traffic for a really long time until it gets cleaned up. And what I see a lot of couples doing is they never clean up the accident. And so the congestion piles up, and then somebody starts rubbernecking and there's another collision nearby. And then it backs up even more. And then there's another accident and another accident. And pretty soon the highway becomes a parking lot and there's no traffic. Like there's no communication getting where it needs to go. And it sounds to me like kind of that's where you were. And you spent the time, this is perfect for your analogy, you're a police officer, you went out and you assessed the issues and you cleaned up the accidents, and it might have taken a freaking long time, but little by little, a lane opened up, and then another lane opened up, and then another lane opened up. And then all of a sudden, like, people were getting where they needed to go. And all of a sudden your communication was like landing, and you could hear each other, and you weren't getting defensive all the time. You're arguing as much, and your heart starts to open up, and you go, oh yeah, I remember why we fell in love. But like, you don't just like pull out a bulldozer and clean up the highway. Like, you got to get in there and make sure everything's okay and clean up the mess. I might have taken that analogy too far, but I love your story for that reason, because it shows that even when things get really messy and the traffic gets really congested and the highway looks like a freak show, like, you can still get in there and clean it up, and the lanes of communication can open up again.
100%. That's a great analogy. And you're right. Communication, it does flow two ways, but again, when there's those accidents that happen. So I'm sure you talk about it a lot, but it's important to understand how you communicate. And it's also important to understand, when you get to that point, what is your process for dealing with it or cleaning up the accident, right? It's like, because
there's probably a process police officers follow, right?
Yeah. It's very simple, right? Because the goal is clean it up as quickly as you can to get traffic flowing back smoothly, right? And it's the same thing in your relationship. It's, if you don't have a method for dealing with the breakdown in communication, the accidents, if you will, then you're going to struggle cleaning it up. And like you said, if you don't clean it up, there's going to be more accidents and more accidents till eventually the whole thing is shut down.
Yeah. That's great, man. So now, like, you flipped your life around, and now this is like kind of what you do, is you help other guys flip their lives around. Tell me a little bit about like what you do and what you're up to right now.
So about 3 years ago, I was at the point where I'd fulfilled my purpose, if you will, in being a police officer, because I kept getting approached by men who were struggling with the exact same things I was struggling with, which brings up a quick little side note is, if you're listening to this, like, understand that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Every relationship suffers with some kind of communication problem. Every relationship suffers because the men are a-holes. The women are probably cheering right now. Every relationship suffers with a lack of communication. It's every relationship, right? So don't think that you're different, or don't think that no one else understands what you're going through. They do. But about 3 years ago, there were a few people that were saying, hey, can you help me? And I was like, well, not really. I've got this 9 to 5 that I got. But I realized that it was something that really drew me. It was something I was really passionate about. And so I retired from police work, and for 3 years now, that's what I've been doing, is helping men take back control of their lives, right? And not by giving you some kind of magical blueprint, like, hey, if you do all of these things, like, it'll work. No, because everybody's life is a little different, but it's more around understanding how marriages work, understanding how life works, and saying, based off of what I want, how can I build out a plan to make it a reality? Much like I had to do in police work, I've just taken all of those tools, tactics, and techniques and just applied them to personal life.
I love that, man. So tell me a little bit more. Like, what are you up to right now? Is there something specifically that you're doing to help men out?
Yeah. So I have a podcast. It's called The Tactical Businessman, centered around that same thing. It's like, how do you take the skills that you already possess, or how can you acquire new skills and then ultimately translate them to those other areas of life to create that perfect or ideal work-life balance? The other thing I have is it's something called the time code. We've talked a lot about time, and ultimately, how do we control time? And I like to refer to
the only finite resource that we have,
Right. And I actually like to refer time in a slightly different format. When you think about time, what is time? Well, time is nothing more than a measurement of distance, right? It's one day is one rotation of the earth. One month is one rotation of the moon around the earth. One year is the earth around the sun. So time is nothing but distance. So when you say, I want more time, what you're really saying is, I want more distance, or I want more progress. What we're ultimately after in life is more progress in our relationships, more progress in our, connection with God, more progress in our ability to make and keep money. So I created the time code for that specific reason, to say, hey, look, regardless of where you're at right now, if you think it's not working at all, if you think it's partially working, there's a way for you to learn to control time. And that's what the Time Code Challenge is about. Leveraging those tools that I've acquired over the years and saying, hey, look, try this on, make it work for you, and then implement and go.
I love it. Well, if people want to check out your podcast or the time code challenge, I'm going to link to them on my website, because I'd love for people who, I know that, like, if there's one thing that I've learned doing this work and trying to help couples have awesome relationships, it's that, trying to find the best way to say this. Not every resource is great for every person. Like, there's not a universal solution. Like, Gandalf maybe wouldn't have been the best guide for Luke Skywalker. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Or Dumbledore maybe wouldn't have done a great job with Bilbo Baggins. You know, sure, he's a wizard, but may not be the ideal guy. And so, like, I know that there's guys or women even listening to this episode right now going, oh, wow, like, Garrett speaks my language. Like, he's talking to my heart, or what he's saying is like really hitting home with me. He gets what I'm going through or what we've been through as a couple. And my goal is always to get people access to the right guide, to the right resources, to the right tools that are going to help them create that progress, create that momentum in their life. And I think there's too many couples out there who are struggling with feeling stuck, and they're struggling with, I don't know, like, they're uninspired. They're not as in love as they used to be. And I think a lot of times people get resigned to the fact that this is just life. Like, this is what happens when you're married for a while, or when you're in a relationship, is the passion fades, the communication dwindles, and resentment builds, and you just need to stick it out and we'll see what happens. And if you're lucky, you survive. And I am not a believer in that. Like, I'm a firm believer that you choose your destiny. And I love that your story reflects that. And I hope that somebody listening today hears your message and hears how you chose your way back to a passionate, connected, inspiring marriage, and realizes that they can do the exact same thing and chooses you as their guide. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I appreciate that. And you're 100% right. It's like, listen, no one has all the answers. Let's just be real. I don't have all the answers. Nate doesn't have it. Nobody has all the answers, right? But you're going to find, just like I did on my journey, and Nate on his as well, there's going to be little tidbits of pieces of information that you're going to get from each person. And ultimately, you're going to find what works for you. And that's the important thing, is understand that life is about that journey. It's about saying, hey, it's not working right now, but what's the one thing that I need to go find to make it work right now? Yeah. And then a year from now, something else isn't working. Go find that piece of information that's working or that you need.
100%. And if you're in that place right now where you're thinking, maybe you're in that deep, dark place where you're thinking maybe life would be better off and your family and friends would be better off without you around. Or maybe you're in that deep, dark place and you're wondering, is my marriage ever going to get any better? Or are we just like stuck in this miserable cycle of despair forever? And I want to encourage you, if you're feeling one of those things or something similar, to reach out to me or to Garrett. Especially, I mean, I don't care who you are, but I think a specific group of people that deals with this is men. Like, one of the things that we've been talking about, and this is a really interesting experience I'll tell you about. You didn't ask me to, but my podcast. So we're doing this Epic Wives experiment right now. And one of the first lessons we talk about a little bit about appreciation and listening to your partner. And one of the things that I always talk about when I teach this lesson is how, as a wife, and I typically ask these women this, I'm like, as a wife, how many of you have, if you have a rough day or if something terrible happens, you have a girlfriend or a sister or a mom that you can call and you can tell them like, oh, this terrible thing happened, or we're struggling with this thing. And they'll get on the phone with you and they'll be like, oh, you're such a good mom, or you're such a good wife. You're going to be okay. Keep your chin up. It'll be all right. And you've got this amazing emotional support system that will encourage you when you're feeling terrible. And I would say like 90% of the wives in the Epic Wives Challenge say, yeah, I've got that. And then I turn around and I say, how many of your husbands have that also? That if they have a rough day, their husbands have a friend or a brother or a dad that they can call and say, man, I'm just like struggling, or I dropped the ball and I feel like a failure. And that guy will get on the phone and be like, oh, buddy, you're such a great husband. You're such a great dad. Like, you're going to be okay. Just keep moving forward. You're not alone. You know, we all make these mistakes. You're going to be all right. And almost every wife is like, oh my gosh, my husband doesn't have that. I said, you're right. Culture, whether it's cultural or whether it's instinctual, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but most men don't have an emotional support system other than their wives. And I think that's a large reason why the suicide rate is like, I think it's over 80% men across the world. And anyway, I digress. The reason I said this is just because I know that there might be guys listening right now who are feeling that despair and that sadness and that depression and that aloneness. And I want you to know that you're not alone. You're not alone. Just like Garrett was saying, you're not alone. And that's why we do the work that we do, is to help guys like you. So if you think your husband is one of those guys who needs a community or who needs a mentor or who needs somebody to talk to, have them reach out.
Beautiful words. Absolutely beautiful words.
Anything you want to leave listeners with before we log off?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly, right? And listen, you don't have to go through life alone.
No.
You don't. There's always somebody there that's willing to listen. There's always somebody that's willing to help. You just have to be willing to seek them out and open up.
Absolutely. All right, brother. Thanks for sharing your story, man. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
You know, whenever I have something really awesome coming up, I like to tell you all about it. I put a lot of time and effort into putting together really cool things to help you strengthen your marriage and make it amazing. And this thing that we have coming up is the most impactful, amazing thing that I've ever had the chance to be a part of. It's the Epic Wives Experiment. We are doing our third iteration of the Epic Wives Experiment starting on May 18th. I got to tell you, we've had over 500 wives participate in the Epic Wives Experiment, and it has been a life-changing experience for so many. We've had some wives that have showed up and said, hey, I thought my marriage was pretty great, and then I started doing this, and I realized how much better it could get. I had no idea that I could do these little things to take my relationship from great to absolutely incredible. And then we've had other wives join who are in a bit of a hard spot. They're feeling a little overwhelmed. They're feeling stressed out. They're feeling burned out. They're feeling a little bit lonely, maybe even growing resentful of their partner. And they come in and they do these little experiments over the course of 4 weeks, and they walk away literally experiencing what I would call miracles. They go from feeling lonely to feeling connected. They go from feeling stressed out and burned out to feeling at peace and like they have more energy and enthusiasm for their relationship. They go from feeling disconnected to feeling massively connected and loved and cared for. And all of this happens a lot of the time without their husbands even knowing they're participating. So if you're a husband listening and you have a wife, obviously, I would love it if you would ask her to join. That would be amazing. And if you are a wife and you want to create a massive positive shift in your relationship, I want to invite you to join the Epic Wives Experiment this May. Just go to epicwivesexperiment.com and you can sign up. The price is insanely affordable, and we are going to do our best to over-deliver for you and to create a massive transformation in your life and in your marriage. I hope you join us. We won't be doing another one probably until fall. So this is your opportunity to get in while the getting's good. Okay, guys, I will see you in there, epicwivesexperiment.com. Very excited to help you experience literally life-changing transformation to make your marriage as good as it possibly can be.